Alright, let's make some spicy Gouda cheese. It's a Monday morning and it is quieter than usual. My toddler is sleeping in a bit, so I've been saving up some milk and I'm going to take the opportunity to get a batch of hot pepper Gouda going. I'm loosely following a recipe from the home cheese making book by Ricky Carroll. It's Gouda on page 116 with the modification of hot pepper Gouda on page 118. I'm going to start by skimming my cream and getting my pot of cheese with utensils steaming so they can sanitize. I'm only going to partially skim my milk. I'm not going to skim it down as far as I normally would if I was making mozzarella, for example. Now, Gouda is a Dutch cheese. It originated from the town of Gouda near Rotterdam. And I'm going to get my peppers ready, my red and green jalapeños. I grew these in the garden last year and dehydrated them. I'm going to sanitize them in the oven. So the recipe calls for boiling them in some water, but I have always found that it works just fine to sanitize them in the oven and then grind them either in a blender or chop them. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pop them in the oven at 200 degrees for about 10 minutes. And I have about 3 1/4 to 3.5 gallons of milk that I'm going to put into my large cheese pot. And I'm going to begin heating it up to 86 degrees. Full disclosure here, the Gouda recipe does call for you to heat it to 90 degrees. The reason why I'm heating it to 86 is because that is a good temperature for the mesophilic culture to be active. Once you get to about 90 degrees, it becomes less active. So I don't think it's the end of the world if you heat it to 90 degrees. I'm just going to tell you what I did and what the recipe says to do, so you can make your own decision there. And it's time to add 1/8 of a teaspoon of a mesophilic culture, such as Floridanica. Mix it in, let it sit for about 10 minutes. So I've made lots of cheese without diluting the rennet in any water. It is recommended that you dilute your rennet in water. This is supposed to help your rennet to distribute evenly through your milk and make for a more uniform curd. I find that if I do dilute it, it's best if I sanitize my water first by boiling it. It just seems to produce more uniform results. So I've made lots of cheese without diluting it at all. But if you're going to do things by the book, it is recommended that you dilute your rennet in some water. And then add the water to the milk. So that's why I like to be sure my water is sanitized. It's just one less thing for me to worry about as far as whether, the water might have been contaminated with something that would off-flavor the milk. It's just not something I want to worry about. I'm going to stir my milk really good. I'm going to continue to top stir it since I used some whole milk as well as some partial skim milk. You just want to make sure the cream is really well incorporated with the curd. And we're going to cover our milk and let it sit until we have a nice curd that has set. So probably a little bit over an hour, or I'd say 90 minutes. I'll check back and see how it's looking. So it's been just over 2 hours since I added the rennet to my milk to coagulate it. I checked back around 1.5 hours and it looked like it used a little more time, so I took the baby on a walk. But we are ready now to cut our curd. The recipe says to try for 1/2-inch cubes with Gouda, but the important thing is to make sure that your curds are somewhat uniform in size. I'm not using a fancy curd knife. This is honestly just a kitchen knife. I'm sure there's rhyme and reason for why you might want to use an actual curd knife, but to me it just seemed like something else to spend money on, and we've always used a regular knife. It's always seemed to work fine. So, and as you can see, my curds are by no means perfectly uniform. That's okay. It's not the end of the world. at the end of making good cheese. Now I'm gonna let my curds set for about 10 minutes now that I've cut them, and I will check back then and proceed to the next step. Now Gouda is a washed curd, which I'll be demonstrating what that means shortly, but as part of that I need to heat some water in my tea kettle to 175 degrees. So while I'm waiting for my curds to settle, that's what I'm doing. So we're washing our cheese curds. We're going to drain off about a third of the way is the first step. And you'll need to mix your curds some as you're doing this, but you do want to be careful not to mix them too much or too fast as you that creation. I'm just going to get a different mixing spoon here. You don't want your cheese curds to be absolutely broken into tiny smithereens yet, as you will lose more of your butter fat if that happens. Okay, I have some water that is just under 175 degrees. I'm going to add just enough of that hot water to my cheese curds while I'm stirring it to raise the temperature to 92 degrees. So, here we go. You want to add your water slowly. You do not want to add too much water in one spot, because that will inhibit the bacterial growth of the mesophytic culture. So just add a tiny little bit of water, and I'm going to check the temperature of my curd. Yeah, it looks like we're probably at about 85 degrees, so I'm going to add just a little more. And gently stirring my cheese curds. And this is what the curds are looking like at this point. They're definitely starting to shrink, more of the whey is coming out, which is what you want. You just want to go easy on them. I'm trying to be gentle. My curd has reached 92 degrees, so I'm going to actually refill my kettle and get some more hot water going, and we're going to let our curds settle for about 10 more minutes, and then we're going to come back and wash it some more. Peppers have had a nice long time to cool, so I'm going to remove the stems and some of the seeds. You can wear gloves for this part if you're nervous about having spicy hands. I'm going to wash my hands really good with dish detergent after this, and I think it should be fine. So you can also do this step in a blender. That's really helpful. And I think I mentioned earlier that the recipe says to boil your chilies and add them to the cheese curd that way. I have found that it works fine to just sanitize them in the oven, let them cool, grind them to powder or chop them really fine, and then add it to your cheese curd, basically at the same time as you're salting your cheese. So that's just the way that I do it. If you want to go the boiling route, I'm sure that would be a fine option too. And it's time to check the water in our tea kettle with the digital thermometer. Now for the second part of washing our curd, we're going to drain off the whey to the level of the curd. It really helps if you have a big ladle, or sometimes I've even used a clean quart jar for this part, just because it can take a while to transfer that much whey. And I'm trying to avoid getting cheese curds in with my whey, but inevitably there will be a few that get in there. A few little pieces. And we almost have our whey drained off to the level of the curd. It seems like it's really complicated, but it's not that complicated. And honestly, these steps are mostly just guidelines. I have made washed cheeses before without using exact temperatures, measuring the exact amount of whey I was draining off, and it worked out fine. So try to follow the recipe, but don't sweat it if you don't get everything exactly perfect. I would say the main things you want to watch out for are you do want to avoid getting your curd too hot, as that would tend to kill the mesophilic culture. And you want to avoid, if you can, being too rough with your cheese curds. But really, within the framework of washing your curd, there's a lot of room for variability. And our whey is drained off to the level of the curd, so we're ready to add some more hot water and raise the temperature to 100 degrees. Now I will say, with this step, you want to be careful that you don't raise it to 102 or 103 or 104 degrees, because that temperature will kill your mesophilic cheese culture. So just be careful as you're heating it that you don't heat it up too much. Okay, I'm going to start to slowly add some more water. The curds at about 92 degrees. And raise it to about another 8 degrees. The water's a little bit more than 170 degrees. Curds at about 100 degrees now. I'm going to continue stirring the curds for the next 15 minutes or so. Just intermittently as I am able to. I'm also going to cover my curd. Now I'm going to let my curd settle for about 30 minutes. Okay, the next step is going to be to pour off the remaining whey, which I'm going to skim some of it off to make that job a little bit easier. So I've poured off the remaining whey, and I have my curds straining in a cheesecloth. And you might be asking, well, Sky, why are you salting your curds now instead of just putting them right in the press and just braining it after you press the curds for the salt? And well, yes, I know that in the cookbook they do have it written like that you don't need to add salt until after you press your curds, but in my experience, you are asking for trouble if you put your curds in a press overnight and you don't salt them, because they're a lot more vulnerable to any bacteria overgrowth or mold overgrowth. It just is a good idea to salt your curds before you press them, in my opinion. At least that's what's worked well for me. Now, I won't necessarily add as much salt to my Gouda as I normally would to, say, my cheddar, but I'm still definitely going to salt my curds. And then I'm going to add the hot pepper flakes, and then I will be transferring it to the cheese press. You want to be sure that the salt that you're using is a non-iodized salt, such as canning salt or sea salt, as iodized salt tends to neutralize the cheese culture. Do you remember our pepper flakes that we set aside? Well, it's time to add those. I have half a tablespoon of dehydrated, sanitized jalapeno peppers. I'm going to go ahead and add them now. Now, I will say that not wearing gloves for this step is probably not the smartest idea, but I am used to working with cheese curds without gloves, and I think it would be hard to switch to wearing gloves, so I'm willing to take the risk of a little bit of pepper hand discomfort for the sake of not having to wear gloves. You just want to work your salt and your pepper flakes through all your cheese curds. You could probably get away with adding a little more jalapeno peppers if you wanted to, but I do think it's advisable to be careful how many pepper flakes that you add. Just like a tablespoon. I'll mix it in, see how it looks. I'm going to go ahead and start adding the cheese curds to my cheese press, packing my cheese mold with them. In my video of making a basic farmhouse jack hard cheese, I talked a little bit more about my cheese press, so not to weary you with the details, I will refer you to that video to talk more about how we made our cheese press. And I'm just trying to gently pack my cheese mold, spread the curds out evenly, not pressing them too much just yet, but trying to distribute them evenly throughout the press so it can press more flatly. And we'll put the follower on and a little plate with a spacer on top. Then we put on the wood board and our weight, that's probably about 25 to 30 pounds of pressure. Once your cheese curds have had a chance to really start to knit together, you want to flip your cheese after about an hour. And redress your cheese, put it back in the cheese press, and continue pressing it for another couple of hours. It looks like the curds are knitting together nicely. Oh, look at that beautiful cheese. Now at some point in the evening, I usually like to take my cheese out of the press and redress it with a fresh, clean cheesecloth. And I also clean my tray. I dump the whey out, and if needed, I give it a quick rinse. So I would say this is probably about 30-35 pounds of pressure. I'm going to press this cheese at overnight. So just check it in the morning and see how it is. About 16 hours since the last time we flipped our cheese curds. We pressed our cheese overnight. Now we're going to go ahead and take it out of the press, see how it looks, and proceed to brining it. I'm just going to comment that if you're not happy with how your curds have knit together, you can stick your cheese into a pot of clean 100-degree water and then repress them again to help finish closing your curds. That's just a tip to be aware of if you find that you're not happy with the rind on your cheese. Now I'm going to be vacuum sealing my cheese, so I'm not worried about a little bit of non-uniformity with my curds. But if you're waxing your cheese, that might be something to be more aware of. Now we're going to begin the process of brining your cheese. I'm going to sprinkle a little more salt on the top for good measure. After a couple of hours, I will flip my cheese, brine on the other side, and then I will take it out of the brine and let it dry. Okay, so I dried my cheese overnight in a cheesecloth, and now I am ready to vacuum seal my cheese. So I am going to cut a piece of plastic to the correct size to make a vacuum seal bag. Now you vacuum seal your cheese. And you want to age your Gouda for a minimum of 60 days, but with Gouda, longer is usually better, so 3 to 4 months or even 6 to 9 months is more ideal. And there you have it. I'm so excited. Hot pepper cheese is a family favorite.